on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Today, a major speech by the Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy, in which he says he wants to reconnect with Europe. Given growing public disenchantment with the Tories' delivery of Brexit, is the whole project in trouble? We'll debate that. Boris Johnson in Ukraine, but now calling for Ukraine to join NATO. Is that a good idea, or could it put us on a collision course, or perhaps even be at war with Russia ourselves? And joining me on Talking Pints, long-time Guardian columnist, fervent anti-Brexiteer, I'll be talking to Polly Toynbee. But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening to you. A relative of the murder victim, Zara Alina, says probation officers have blood on their hands after a report found her killer was released from prison just days before carrying out the attack. Jordan McSweeney was given a life sentence last month after he admitted killing the law graduate. He attacked 35-year-old Zara in East London as she walked home after a night out last June. The findings show McSweeney should have been treated as a high risk of serious harm offender, but was wrongly graded as a medium risk. Zara's aunt, Farah Naz, says more needs to be done to avoid the same thing happening again.
Our streets are not safe. Probation work has to be tight, has to be high quality, because the risks, the stake is high. The stake is lives. Zara's life was taken, and probation have blood on their hands.
Well, in other news today, the chairman of the BBC says he won't stand down from his role over the Boris Johnson loan row. Richard Sharp made the comments as he welcomed a review by the Commissioner of Public Appointments into how he got his job. Mr Sharp's under scrutiny over his links to the former Prime Minister and his role in talks over an £800,000 loan. Speaking to the BBC, Mr Sharp said he was confident he'd been appointed on merit. And in Scotland, the firefighter who was seriously hurt in a blaze at the Jenner's department store in the centre of Edinburgh yesterday has been named. 38-year-old Barry Martin joined dozens of other crew members to tackle the flames, which broke out on Rose Street at about 11:30 a.m. He's still in hospital this evening in a critical condition. The Scottish Fire and Rescue Service saying they're still trying to work out how the fire started. Poland has formally requested Germany's approval to send up to 14 Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. The Polish Defence Minister says the request comes as the security of the whole of Europe is at stake. The German government spokesperson said they'd treat the request with utmost urgency. And it comes after Boris Johnson urged other countries to follow the UK's lead in providing tanks. Writing in today's Daily Mail, the former Prime Minister called on other nations to provide Kyiv with the weapons it needs to win the war. And lastly, Princess Eugenie says she and her husband Jack Brooksbank are so excited to be expecting their second child. A photograph released on Instagram today by the princess shows the couple's first child, August, hugging his mum's pregnant tummy. In a statement, the palace said the royal family is delighted and August is very much looking forward to being a big brother. Those are the latest news stories on GB News. You are up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. Back now to Farage.
I can do it. 1 second.
Good evening. Well, today, a major speech by David Lammy, the Shadow Foreign Secretary. He delivered it at lunchtime at Chatham House. Here's a flavour of what he had to say.
Reconnecting Britain to Europe while remaining outside of the European Union will be our top priority for the next Labour Foreign Office. Keir Starmer has been clear. With Labour, Britain will not rejoin the European Union, the single market or the customs union.
So that's David Lammy. The big message is we will not be rejoining the single market. We will not be rejoining the European Union. Well, of course, he had to say that. The Red Wall, after all, would not want to hear any different. But just for a moment, folks, if you don't know who David Lammy is, he is an absolutely fanatical EU rejoiner. And he even, believe it or not, compared the ERG, the European Research Group, that backbench group of Eurosceptics in the Conservative Party, he even compared them to Nazis. And when he was challenged on it, he said that term possibly wasn't strong enough. But the language is pretty clear. He wants to reconnect with Europe. He says, never again must we be isolated in our own continent. And he runs through a list of things where we need to work more closely with our European partners. He's going to remove friction to trade, sort the Northern Irish problem. In foreign policy, he makes it absolutely clear that we would not have an independent foreign policy. We do it together as a European Union. And that goes for security, climate change action, and much else besides. What he's really talking about is full-blown Brino. Brexit in name only, where we align ourselves as closely as possible to pretty much everything the European Union does. And then maybe, come a second Labour term if that was to happen, the argument is, well, we're obeying all of the rules, we may as well have a say. So I'm not for one moment suggesting that a Keir Starmer landslide means we rejoin the European Union. We won't. That isn't going to happen. But effectively, it will not be Brexit at all. Although you could argue that the Conservatives have so failed to deliver on the aspirations of so many millions who wanted Brexit, that perhaps actually the fault lies rather more at their door than it does with David Lammy. Either way, you tell me what you think. Is Brexit in trouble? Farage at gbnews.uk. I have to say, I rather fear that it is. Well, joining me is the Conservative Member of Parliament for Chingford and Woodford, former leader of the Conservative Party, Ian Duncan Smith. Ian, good evening. You heard, of course, what David Lammy had to say at Chatham House. This really would be Brino, wouldn't it?
Well, I must say I was slightly taken by his remarks concerning the European Research Group and his comparison with the Nazis. The truth is that it's called democracy, David. And, you may not like them, but we were elected and we're entitled to have our views. All we ever asked for was to leave the European Union and get on with our own, sort our regulations out, make sure we do deals with other countries and make the most of it. And that's really where we are at the moment.
Well, Ian, I mean, you could say that, but I mean, I'm, as you know, passionate Brexiteer. I look at the absolute failure to control our borders, be that legal or illegal immigration. I look at the fact that virtually no business regulations have been simplified, and that especially matters for 5.5 million men and women running small businesses. I mean, do you understand why a lot of people are very disappointed with the delivery of Brexit that we've had from the Conservative Party?
Well, there's no question we need to get these things done. The problem, forgive me, the problem has been that we had COVID for 2 years, and it really bust a huge amount of possibilities for us. But we're getting on with it now. We've got the bill that's just gone through to get rid of retained EU law. That, all right, you might have argued should have happened before, but it took a while to sort out, but that's going through. We are now beginning, and I wrote the report called the Tigger Report, which is about regulatory change. Now, they're now moving on that to make big changes. Financial Services is now talking about getting rid of Solvency II, which is a big deal for the city. There's others like MiFID, which they'll move on to. But we've also got a lot going on now in the regulation side, and that also includes farming and the environment. So there are big changes coming down the tracks now. So, yes, I would love it to have happened earlier, but I think all things considered, the key thing is we get it done so that the UK is well and truly and properly out. We have Northern Ireland to sort still, which is going on, but that can only end with one single decision, which is no part of the United Kingdom will ever be under a law from a foreign organisation, in this case European law. That old American adage, no taxation without representation, holds good for Northern Ireland as it did for the United States.
Yeah, all good. You know, if those things happen, I'll be delighted, but it will be 7 years in June since we voted, so please forgive my frustration on these issues, along with many others. You didn't mention borders, Ian. You know, taking back control. And there's no doubt that the reason in that, and you spotted it on the day, the reason we got the turnout we got in the referendum, a lot of people, especially in working class communities, voting for reduced numbers coming into Britain. There's been no delivery on that at all, and nor do I see any prospect of it.
Well, there is a bill now about to go through the House, which will ensure that those who come illegally will not stay here in the country. And that's a critical element. The government's about to launch that bill. We should get that through reasonably quickly. We need to stop the illegal boats coming and those coming through illegally at the moment. And that's the key.
Well, I don't believe a word of it until we leave the ECHR, but we'll have that debate, Ian, another day. I must ask you quickly about China. It's a subject that you've spoken out on. We've seen yet another report that 40 British universities have taken very large sums of money. But this other report that's come out from Charles Parson suggesting that microchips, Chinese microchips, you know, could be in our cars, our washing machines, or even our light bulbs. Is Westminster, I know you are, but is Westminster taking the threat, the potential threat of the Chinese spying on every aspect of our lives? Are they taking it seriously in that building?
Well, I think individual MPs are certainly taking it seriously. More and more of them are gathering. I said of an organisation called the Interparliamentary Alliance on China. We now have 30 countries with co-chairs, parliamentary co-chairs, and all 30 from Japan to the United States. No question at all that we are taking that seriously. Governments, I'm afraid, across the West have been slow to respond to what is essentially a very direct threat to the way we live our lives by China. And critically, of course, it's a matter of pushing them. The present government still isn't quite over the line with this, so we get a government policy which doesn't quite meet the ask. But we really need to recognise that they are capable of spying on us. They are doing it regularly. They have planted their money into lots of universities, made them very dependent on China. You know, Huawei has set up their operations in Cambridge. I wonder why. And they're banned from doing the telecom stuff. So huge real threat. And if Russia succeeds in holding on to Ukraine, I tell you, that immediately emboldens China to have a go at Taiwan. And so this thing is very important. China poses a very serious threat to us. All governments will recognise it.
Well, they should do. Ian, a final thought, just picking up on Ukraine. Boris Johnson has been in Ukraine for the last couple of days. Today, for the first time, explicitly calling for Ukraine to join NATO, something that could put us as a country on direct collision course with Russia. Is he right to suggest Ukraine should join NATO?
Well, I don't think it's going to happen for some time to come, and I think Ukraine has to settle. It needs to be stable. There's an awful lot of money is going to have to be spent to try and get them up. Some say well over $1 trillion will need to be spent to get the infrastructure back up as and when this war is over. I think the key thing right now is not that they join the NATO, because that would add an element to this. I think the key thing is that we make sure they have all the military equipment it takes to be able to fight this war. They're quite capable, I believe, of winning it, having been out there myself before Christmas. I don't fully agree that you need to do it now, but I do think in due course that will probably happen. But the key thing, let's get the tanks to them. And I hear the good news tonight is that Germany has finally relented and agreed now to let the tanks go, which is good news. They need those. They need long-range artillery. And when I was out there, they said we need munitions dramatically and support for our soldiers in the hospitals. And all of these things we should back them. Their war is our war in any way, but they are going to fight it. We need to make sure they have the right equipment to beat the Russians and to actually end this ghastly invasion.
Ian Duncan-Smith, thank you for joining me here on GB News. And that's very much the view. Very much the view everywhere is if we send lots and lots of weapons to Ukraine, they can beat Russia, and it will all be over fairly shortly. Have to say, I don't believe a word of it. In a moment, we're going to get Navarra Media on to get a rather centre-left view on all of those questions I just put to Ian Duncan-Smith. Is Brexit in trouble? How big a threat is China? And as for this NATO decision, well, this idea of Boris Johnson's, I think it's complete and utter madness.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So, GB News viewers and listeners, do you think Brexit could be in trouble? Well, John says it's going to be overturned very soon. Gosh, we need you back leading the fight. Well, there we are, John. I haven't thrown the armour away, I promise you. Angela says, yes, Labour are ready to sell the soul of the UK back to the EU. Well, David Lammy certainly would be. Sam says, yes, it turns out Brexiteers were lying. Obviously, their paymasters enriched themselves and sunk the rest of us. I don't know who these paymasters were. I can assure you I didn't have any paymasters, and I don't believe I said anything that was untrue. Maybe one or two of the others did, but then name me an election where people don't perhaps over-exaggerate their case, either side. Ryan says, it has been since the 23rd of June 2016. The state simply cannot accept that we, the public, dared to question their authority. Ryan, I agree with you 100%, I think. Truth of it is, the Conservative Party were in government. They inherited a Brexit vote. They made an absolute horlicks of it under Theresa May. They were kicked hard in 2019. But I don't even think, with an 80-seat majority, they ever collectively, as a cabinet, really believed in it. Now, Novara Media is on the left of the political spectrum. Aaron Bastani was one of its founders. So we've heard Ian Duncan-Smith, who firmly, on the centre-right of British politics. You've heard what David Lammy had to say. It pretty much was code, wasn't it, for keeping us or making us more closely aligned to the EU than we are today.
Well, it was very clever. I thought it was very astute politics. It does take a little bit of reading between the lines. It came across as professional, slick. It felt a bit, Back to the Future, a bit sort of Blairite in a lot of the language, multilateralism and whatnot.
Isn't that what Starmer wants the Labour Party to be?
Yeah, and I think there is a subtext there, which you're right to highlight, which is about broadly aligning ourselves with the European Union, but like you say, not touching that political hot potato of EU membership. Super interesting. I mean, we could talk about, I suppose, the foreign policy choices that have been made outside the EU. I think lots of people on the right and the centre, and probably the centre-left, they bash Johnson, but they don't bash him for his foreign policy choices so far.
But
so it's an interesting
Well, it's
line.
interesting, isn't it? I mean, I'm one of the most frustrated Brexiteers in the country because they haven't delivered some of the things I wanted. But, the AUKUS deal with Australia taking the lead on Ukraine, these are all things we couldn't have done or wouldn't have done as full EU members.
Well, Lammy talks about the AUKUS deal. They want to build on it. They want to stay in the Pacific. They want to align with the EU. They want to reform the Security Council. There's a lot there. It's very ambitious.
But you can't do it all.
You can't, no. It's very ambitious.
But the Labour Party itself, I mean, it fought the last election, wanting a second referendum.
Yeah.
I mean, they're basically rejoiners, aren't they, at heart?
Well, they are, yeah. I mean, people like David Lammy, Keir Starmer, that is utterly central to who they are as politicians, as people, as voters, even if they weren't in politics, those are the kinds of people they would be. But I think, Nigel, and this is probably something you've observed and been surprised by in the last few years, I certainly have, Keir Starmer is ruthless. He is ruthless. This was a chap on the pro-EU second referendum demonstrations in 2019, their standard bearer, their tribune, and now he's saying to the Red Wall, I will never rejoin the EU. And like you said earlier, I believe him. I don't think Labour plans to take Britain back into the European Union. So that ruthlessness has surprised me. And I think it's probably surprised a lot of people on the right too, because they saw Keir Starmer as a very different kind of politician.
And he's basically kicked Corbyn out of the party.
Oh, he has been utterly ruthless. He's been, he could teach Machiavelli a thing or two.
And what kind of Labour government would it be? I mean, they're talking about putting VAT on private school fees, getting rid of non-doms. They're going to be even higher tax than the Conservatives, aren't they?
But those two things you just mentioned, you might not like them, some of your viewers might not like them, but they are quite popular and they're quite small. They're not huge things.
They don't affect a huge...
Precisely.
7% of the population send their kids to private schools.
But it's not increasing income tax. But the thing is, Nigel, with the state of public service in this country, all the problems we have, ambulance waiting times, any waiting times, getting a doctor's appointment, etc. My suspicion is, just to cover the basics now, we're going to have taxes increased to a level that really Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell were talking about before 2019. If you want all of these nice things like they were 15 years ago, and that isn't the argument Labour's making right now to the public. They're talking about these little tiny things that fundamentally don't really impact many people.
So closer to the European Union, he made it very clear that our foreign policy would be aligned to the EU. He talked about China briefly in the speech. Ian Duncan-Smith has been one of the people in Parliament leading the charge, saying we should be very scared of China. Some call him paranoid. I don't know where Labour stand on this, do you?
I don't. I mean, it's a very dynamic situation. This was a big intervention today about the relationship between the universities and whatnot. A few points, though. British universities are really dependent upon Chinese students. There's no two ways about that. Without them, a lot of them can't keep their heads above water. The reason for that is that Ian Duncan Smith and his pals in the Conservative Party increased tuition fees 300% in 2010, but also cut government spending to universities. So they depend on Chinese students.
Well, there were no tuition fees until Labour brought them in. It was Mr Blair that brought them in and massively expanded the numbers going to university.
But I find it strange to say that, well, you know, universities are dependent upon funding from Chinese institutions or Chinese students. True. Well, you enabled that situation, which I find rather surprising, rather counterintuitive. Labour's message on China, I'm sure we'll hear something. Like I say, the speech today was impressive, slick, professional. They didn't drill into too many details on anything, including China. I'm sure that'll change.
NATO. Traditionally, many on the left have been suspicious of NATO. I haven't been suspicious of NATO, but NATO expansion was something that I was always very concerned about. The Johnson suggestion, and this is going to get traction, this isn't going to go away. I mean, Ian Duncan Smith there saying, yes, ultimately, he thought NATO should, you know, include Ukraine. Where does the left go on this stuff?
I don't know. I think, look, Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party in 2019. Labour didn't have in its manifesto to withdraw Britain from NATO or to renounce nuclear weapons. We know Jeremy Corbyn's personal feelings on this, but that wasn't the Labour Party's position under his leadership. I think a lot of the criticism and scepticism towards NATO over the last 20 years has been justified. NATO shouldn't have gone to Libya. It shouldn't have gone to Afghanistan. And we're in the strange moment right now that if you said those things over the last 20 years, apparently you're a Putin,
this is very difficult.
worshipper.
This is very difficult for me, folks. Very difficult indeed, because I'm agreeing with Aaron. You know, I have to say, I do agree with you. Yeah, and as soon as you say that, you are supportive of Mr Putin and you support the invasion, and it's all baloney. On Lammy, you talked about what a slick performance it was. And yet this is a man who called the ERG Nazis. He's not very grown up, really, is he?
I find David Lammy a really interesting character because he's very polished, good media performer. You know, he was on LBC. He's very charismatic. But then he makes these occasional missteps like that, for instance, which is just insensitive and stupid, frankly. And he is one of these sort of, I don't want to call him a career politician because he's not. He was a lawyer and, you know, he studied at Harvard and whatnot. He's a very talented man. But it is interesting. He makes these strange oversteps at times, and I think he regrets that. It's obviously a silly thing to say for elected
It was a very silly thing to say for a man who could be our next Foreign Secretary. Final thought.
Yeah.
There are still banana skins ahead for Keir Starmer, and one of them, I suspect, is women's rights and a trans issue. I mean, when you see, you know, the Labour member of Parliament, independent, you know, elected Labour member of Parliament for Canterbury, being shouted down by her own side for daring to talk about women's rights, when Keir Starmer can't even define what a woman is. These are problems, aren't they?
Well, the one thing, look, I've not been invited on here as a supporter of Keir Starmer.
No, I know. No. But you've been invited on because I've had a more centre-right perspective on life.
Because I was going to say something kind about Keir Starmer, so I don't want your audience to think that I'm some Starmer supporter, because that wouldn't be accurate. Starmer has said in this whole discussion around Gender Recognition Act and gender recognition certificates and so on, to take the heat out of it. And I think that's a really important point to make. And I think with any civil liberties issue, you're going to have disagreements and you're going to have disputes, and some of that can get ironed out in the detail, and some can't, right? Some people will be persuaded and some won't, and some compromises will be reached. Well, but all of that needs a bit of calm and tranquility, and
well, there wasn't much of that.
Hopefully we'll see a bit more of it.
When Rosie Duffield was speaking in the House of Commons last week. Aaron, thank you for coming in and joining me. There you are. I've tried to give you a centre-right and a centre-left perspective on today's news with a bit of my own opinion. I think the Tories have made a complete blooming mess of Brexit. Yes, Ian can talk about all the regulatory changes going through, but it's the borders. That's where they've completely and utterly failed. And that opens up the door for Labour to take us much, much closer. Is Brexit in trouble? Well, we're not going to rejoin the European Union, but is the kind of Brexit many of us believed in trouble? Yep, you bet your life. In a moment, we're going to dig deeper into that strategy of NATO and the EU moving further eastwards.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank. My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous.
Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm going to come back to NATO. I think what Johnson has said is really important and fascinating that Ian Duncan Smith supports it. Now, I'll be honest with you, I've been at odds with almost the entirety of the establishment on this for many, many years. In 2014, the democratically elected leader of Ukraine was brought down by the Orange Revolution, people standing in the square in Kiev waving European Union flags. It was clear we wanted to expand eastwards, not just the EU, but NATO as well. I felt that was a strategic mistake. I said in the parliamentary chamber in 2014 there would be a war in Ukraine. They hated me for it then, they hate me for it now. That's how I feel about this. But I'm joined by communications consultant for Special Project Partners, former naval officer James Gator. James, you know, we've, as a country, believed in NATO since the late 1940s, and I think with very good reason. It's been a pretty remarkable organisation, but circumstances change. You know my position on this.
Very well.
And you may well disagree with it, I don't know. But here's the point. At a moment when we've got a war going on in Ukraine that frankly looks a bit like 1917, with trenches, artillery bombardments, you know, infantry approaches over open ground, the prospect of a spring offensive, I think, coming from the Russians, and that's why the Ukrainians want tanks, and I understand it from their point of view. But with Putin, and with the fact he's dared to talk about nuclear weapons, does it make sense for a former foreign secretary and a former prime minister? I mean, strategically, does it make sense for us at this moment to talk about Ukraine joining NATO?
Well, Nigel, I understand your position, but fundamentally, it's arguable that this war could only ever have started as it fell in the grey zone, if you wish, between Ukraine being a member of NATO and not a member of NATO. I think, and I would argue that Boris Johnson thinks that this is about changing public perceptions. It's not about cold, hard facts about joining. Let's face it, joining NATO is going to be an extended process. It's going to take an awfully long time. But it's about the perception. It's about our position as a nation state and what we think to be acceptable in the future. As your earlier guests pointed out, the fact is that joining now is inconceivable. I don't believe that's what Boris Johnson said. Joining now would mean, yes, you would be right.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's actually what's being suggested.
OK, but I mean, my reason, one of my main reasons for not wanting this eastward expansion was I felt it would give Putin a casus belli. He could say to the Russian people, look, they're surrounding us, they're threatening us, to give him a reason where they would back him in a military endeavour such as this. That was the point that I was making. Surely, even if the suggestion that this membership's down the road, I mean, isn't this a dangerous time?
Nigel, NATO is a defensive organisation, and what better form of defence than to protect ourselves from attack? The fact of the matter is that if Ukraine had been on a closer path to joining NATO, Putin would very likely have thought twice about his invasion. Now, really, is this about giving Putin a casus belli? The fact is that we need to get behind the Ukrainians as much as possible, not only protect them, but to protect ourselves.
Is this war winnable for Ukraine?
With enough resources, yes. In the last half an hour, it's been reported by Der Spiegel that tanks are going to be sent, or Leopard 2s are going to be sent. Another company, that's 28 tanks in total with the Challenger 2s. They need all the tanks they can get, and they need them to protect the rest of Europe.
OK, James Gaynor, thank you very much indeed. Very clear opinion there. I've got my opinion on this. Quick, what the Farage moment. It was a special question that was raised in Parliament today, and it's about the fact that 200 so-called children have gone missing from asylum hotels. 200 youngsters that have crossed the English Channel. Well, of course, we had a 14-year-old, apparently, who turned out to be 20, who murdered somebody in Bournemouth. I don't think these are children being abducted from these hotels. I think you'll find the vast majority actually are adults. We know most are Albanian. They'll be absconding and joining criminal gangs. That is what is happening with so many people that cross the Channel, although a lot of people would rather we didn't talk about it. Now, I'm going to have a debate in a moment with Polly Toynbee. Of course, she's been writing for The Guardian for years. Unlike many journalists, though, she did once actually stand for Parliament. She's a fervent anti-Brexiteer. We're going to have a debate over a drink.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's that time of the day. The GB News Tavern is open. It's Talking Pints, and I'm joined by Polly Toynbee. Polly, welcome to the programme. Now, I've done a bit of time in politics and a bit of time in journalism. And quite often, you know, I've been quite angry over the years with the press pack. Questions they've asked, things they've written. And I've often said, hey, it's all right for you lot. You can stand at the back of the room and chuck beer bottles. You've never actually had a go, but you did have a go. And, you know, for those that have forgotten it or weren't around at the time, you know, the Limehouse Declaration, the SDP, the 83 general election, you were fully signed up for this, weren't you?
A lot of people have forgotten. It's long ago. It's a footnote in history. I'm afraid it didn't get very far. At the time, that really looked like a moment when the SDP might break the mould, as you've often talked about.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you had Thatcher at the bottom of a depression in 81. Unemployment, particularly youth unemployment, through the roof. Huge cuts, incredibly unpopular. She was the most unpopular Prime Minister there'd ever been at that point in 1981 when the SDP was formed. On the other hand, you had Michael Foot, who was out of NATO, out of Europe, you would have liked that aspect of him, nationalising everything, who was also unelectable. And so it seemed like the moment for a decent social democratic party. I believe the country is essentially social
and
democratic
it was led by some big figures. It was led by some big figures, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, at one point, it hit over 50% in the polls when Shirley Williams won her by-election. It did fantastically well. But then, you know, the Falklands War happened, Thatcher's popularity rose enormously. But mostly, as you know very well, it was the electoral system that broke us.
You stood. I
stood
for the SDP.
for Lewisham East, and it's very hard work. I mean, even when you don't win, let alone if you become an MP, nurturing a constituency for several years before a run-up to election, you have to get to know every street, every business, every school. It's really, really hard work, let alone those politicians who are actually, you know, running the country at Westminster and then looking after a constituency as well. And I think you're right, people do underestimate it. I think being a journalist is a cushy life. I think it's a doddle compared with being a
Good, I'm pleased you said that.
Now, you know, I think a lot of politicians are wrong uns and bad uns, but mostly probably not. Mostly I think they're in it because they believe in something and something that they think they can make the world better. And I remind myself, and I remind other journalists too, that we sit there in our crow's nest, you know, shooting down politicians as they come and go. We stay there I've been there a hell of a long time. They come and go. We stay there forever, pontificating about them. And a measure of humility from time to time is necessary. You know, we need good people to go into politics, democracy depends on it, and we should be careful not to allow too much cynicism. Frankly, at the moment, given the appalling things that have happened in the last few years, it's quite difficult to keep one's belief in politics going because we've had such appalling governance.
Is the system part of that? You know, I mean, you said the SDP were a footnote in history, but it's very interesting. If you actually look at the number of votes, the popular vote that the SDP got compared to the Labour Party, they really weren't very far behind.
Oh, we were less than 2% behind.
Yeah.
And if we had overtaken them, even though the system would have given us very little seats, because it's such an unjust system without proportional representation, that would have psychologically changed the whole game. But we didn't quite reach there for the reason that people understand the voting system and they know that in the end, you have to hold your nose and vote against the party you hate most.
Yeah.
And so when
I get it.
Thatcher and Foote, they were more frightened of one or the other than they were for us, and I think we would have won. We would have won under any proportional system.
I think a lot of voting actually is who we think the least worst is, and that's where we finished up. But in a way, you did win because you got Tony Blair.
Well, we have long arguments about this, whether there are people in Labour who didn't leave, people who nearly left, like Dennis Healey, a number of people who were on the brink of joining the SDP. And at the last moment, they said, we've looked across Europe and we've seen what happens when the left splits. It's always a disaster. Who say, oh, well, we allowed Thatcher to win for longer because we'd helped split the left. There were others who said, no, it was hugely influential on Labour. It got Kinnock in there, and Kinnock, who himself changed radically while he was leader and pulled the party back
I think it
to
did.
sense.
I think it did.
And whether that was us or whether it would have happened anyway, I don't know. I like to think that we contributed, but it's one of those what-ifs in history.
And the electoral system, you're still a PR fan?
Passionately, and I write about it quite often. Member of the Electoral Reform Society, Make Votes Matter. I belong to all of these things. It's very, very difficult fight because people regard it as rather abstract. But I think now we have so much tactical voting, people have twigged. They understand how the system is stacked against.
The opinion polls are shifting. They really are. So, Polly, you had a go. You were part of it, and that's important. Journalism. You've been writing opinion columns for a very, very long time. You've never been particularly scared of giving your opinion about the royal family or nuclear disarmament or Brexit or whatever it may be. And you and I probably disagree on quite a lot, but that's fine. In a civilised society, we should be allowed to do that. But tell me this. With the advent of the internet, Twitter, Facebook, all these different things, how influential are newspapers? How influential are newspaper columnists these days compared to when you started?
Well, I think surprisingly, in the beginning we thought, right, we've had it. Newspapers will be gone in a couple of years. Everything will be news sites. News sites on the web will take over. What's been extraordinary is the extent to which the brands of newspapers are still incredibly powerful. I mean, The Guardian is far more powerful than it used to be. We were, a small dead trees newspaper, and now we are across the globe. We're probably the second most influential liberal news source that people around the world turn to. In America, Australia, where we have big offices in both. It's been phenomenal.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I see this in America particularly, that English titles online do incredibly well. Somehow, whatever our own criticisms of Fleet Street as we used to know it, somehow this industry is respected around the world, isn't it?
Well, some more than others. I'm not sure that the Sun is all that respected, or even the Daily Mail. I'm afraid.
No. Well, it
depends who you meet. I mean, if you want to go and meet Trumpists, you'll find them loving that.
But if you go and meet the Mail in America's huge. Absolutely huge.
Well, it's huge amongst the sort of Trump-type faction, that's true.
Well,
amongst the more extreme Republicans.
No. This is where it all goes wrong. You say extreme. Actually, about 43% of the country think he's a hero. You can't write them all off as being extremist. I mean, that's a little bit like saying after the referendum that, Brexiteers are all terrible knuckle-draggers. They're not, are they?
I think it's different. Brexit was about one issue. I think the people who followed Trump, I really think that's deeply alarming. I think, you know, a thoroughly dangerous and dishonest, disreputable man. That's a different thing. I mean, Brexit, I think, you know, people were promised by people like you 350 million a week for the NHS.
They've got far more than that.
Where is that?
They've got far more than that.
Nonsense.
Oh, absolutely, far more
not.
than that.
Of course
I mean,
not.
NHS spending has increased way more than that.
But NHS spending is still overall far less proportionately than it's been, and that's why the NHS is on its knees. It's
Actually,
had 13
Polly,
years of stripped down funding.
12% of our GDP is now going into
Yes,
the NHS.
indeed, but it's not as much as France and Germany
No,
spend.
more now, actually.
No, it's not.
No, I'm not going to argue that with you because they're fine points. I want to, you know, put about talking points is it's bigger picture stuff. So the titles still matter. People read this stuff online. They don't buy many copies of the news of the hard newspaper. But then again, when you look at the newspaper, I mean, it's actually, you know, here's the Guardian. Today's, you know, I mean, you know, we're paying nearly £3 for a newspaper. I mean, it's quite a lot of money, isn't
Well,
it,
it's
really?
not. It's not. You know, people who really want it will pay for it, and it's never going to be a mass circulation in the way that it used to be. But some people still really want the nice feel of a newspaper. But essentially, the business is now online for all newspapers, and the competition is online.
You do this job. You write your columns. You say what you think. You earn money from doing it. Is it a job or a passion?
It's both. I'm jolly lucky. It's not very often that people have jobs that are passions. It's a wonderful job, but no, I feel a passionate love for The Guardian, its ethos, its world, its history, and I feel a sense of belonging there and identity. And what's great is when you go out and you talk to people, you know, talks, literary festivals and things, I write books, people assemble who are Guardian readers, and they say, we're the only Guardian readers in the village.
It's quite a rarefied social group, isn't it?
It's not very rarefied.
It's very middle class and very upper middle class, isn't
I
it?
think you find we're about to win the election in a rather spectacular way.
Well, actually...
And you are going to be the minority, and we are going to be the majority.
Well, actually, the truth is the next election is going to be fought between two forms of social democracy. I mean, they're not much different.
Hardly.
Polly,
You can
there's one
hardly
issue.
call...
We know what we disagree on, but I don't dislike you, and I don't believe you dislike me, and we can have a civil debate about things. But there's one issue that fascinates me. And you are one of the patrons of Right to Die. And it's one of the issues, you know, I was almost 21 years an MEP. I get emails and letters about Right to Die. And I could never make my mind up because I saw what was happening in the Netherlands. I've seen what's happened in Canada. I worry that whilst, of course, we'd like a civilised end for people having a dreadful last few weeks or months, that it's so open to abuse. But you're firmly of this view, yeah?
I'm firmly of this view. I mean, every piece of legislation has possible downsides, possible slippery slopes. But, you know, the latest reports show that 17 people a day are dying for several months in absolute agony, which can't, with even the best palliative care, can't cure. And I watched my mother die of cancer. She had wonderful care, no complaint about it at all, but, you know, morphine doesn't work for everybody. And it is agony and terrible. Also, awful things happen. I mean, you know, cancers burst out of people's abdomen and they stink, and their families can hardly come close to them, and they cry out to die. And the families, you know, the doctors can't, particularly since Harold Shipman, they used to perhaps be able to give them a bit more, no longer. Now, that is real torment and horror. Now, it is possible that even if you have a judge and two doctors and somebody in, you know, in sound mind saying they want to die and explaining why, that once in a while, there might be some mistake. But that's nothing like what goes on now. And when you talk to nurses who deal with the dying, you know, what they witness every day, there's an awful lot of, you know, obituary notices that say died peacefully in their sleep, and you go, I wonder.
Polly, you believe that with great passion. I'm worried that it could be abused. For me, the jury is still out, but you are a campaigning journalist, and I thank you for coming on Talking Pints.
Thank you.
OK, it's time for, and I'm going to keep Polly here, it's time for Barrage the Farage. I've got your questions. I never know what they're going to be. Mick asks, is ULEZ Mr Khan's poll tax moment, and will it see him topple. Well, it won't see him topple immediately, but by golly, has he got this wrong. I live right out on the North Downs, Polly. I mean, right out on the North Downs, single-track roads. You can never tell whether you're actually in Kent or Greater London because the boundaries changed a few years ago. And the only people who will pay ULEZ are the older and poorer people. That can't be right, can it?
Well, I'm all in favour of it because in the end, we have to have clean air. And this isn't just...
We've got great clean air now to London.
Well, there's always going to be difficulty of any border where you put anything. I think in the end, the environment, and particularly, the children with asthma who are dying of particulates in the air, I think it's necessary. I think a responsible politician does what's right even when it's not popular with everyone.
Well, it's pretty unpopular in outer London. That is absolutely for certain. Although, the Clean Air Act and various things, and London is much better than it was in the 1950s.
Well, I was a child with bronchitis before the Clean Air Act. And I was ill a lot of the time. The Clean Air, and there were pea supers, so you stand at the bus stop to go to school, you couldn't see the number on the bus. And it all changed overnight with the Clean Air Act.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about it. We want to live in a cleaner, better environment, no question about it. Quick one, Nicola asks, do you think the Conservative Party no longer cares whether it gets back into power or not at the next election? I think they've pretty much given up, most of them. I think they know they're completely and utterly doomed. They're split down the middle. They all hate each other. They were nearly all at the same school and the same Oxford College and all did the same degree, and they're basically pretty hopeless, and they'll be replaced by another lot who aren't dissimilar. I'm finished. I'm back tomorrow night with you at 7 o'clock. Now it's over to Lawrence Fox.
Good evening. Thank you, Nigel. Tonight we will be discussing non-binary Jesuses. Is it the end of the world as we know it? And migrant children missing.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest broadcast from the Met Office. Still the risk of some fog and freezing fog patches, particularly across southern parts of England. Through the next 24 hours we will see rain pushing south, and we can see that nicely on the pressure chart. A cold front pushes southwards across the UK, but high pressure always nearby, meaning those weather fronts will be on the weak side. Generally staying dry for many as we end the week, but weather fronts always nearby towards the north. Through this evening time, frost and fog reforming across central and southern parts of England. Elsewhere, generally quite cloudy, particularly as we head into the early hours, some rain and drizzle pushing in across the north and the west. Here, mild, temperatures holding up -5 or -6, again across central southern England as we head towards Wednesday morning. Cloudy, foggy start across the south, the fog patches dense in places. Band of rain pushing south across northern parts of the UK. This light and patchy generally. Behind it, though, turning brighter into the afternoon across Scotland and Northern Ireland. There will be some showers across northern Scotland, 1 or 2 of these heavy. Cloudy and cold across the south of England, 5 or 6 degrees at best. 7 to 9 across the north of the UK. So feeling a little fresher than it has over the last couple of days here. Through Wednesday evening, that cloud and rain pushes and clears south of England, then a clear night to come, particularly across central areas. A few showers around coastal parts in that northerly breeze, but under the clearer skies, it'll allow temperatures to dip away. So generally falling 2 to 5 Celsius in towns and cities, a little below freezing in the countryside, but enough of a breeze generally to keep it frost and fog-free for many. Into Thursday, we'll see a bit of a westy split developing, cloudier skies towards the east, but there will be some brighter spells here, though 1 or 2 showers are possible. Best of the sunshine across the west, unbroken in places. Generally a light northerly breeze. Over the next few days, high pressure holds on, keeps it largely dry. Weak weather fronts try to move in from the north and temperatures around average.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today.
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness, brilliant.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous.
Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting